Well, hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Sarah Miller with the Small Business Association of Michigan. I am filling in for Rob Fowler while he still enjoys some vacation time. Brian Calley is with us. We're letting his voice recover a little. He had a big gig at the policy conference on Mackinac Island last night, so he'll be right here with us in a minute. But I do want to thank our sponsor, Marana Group. And we're going to do a little bit of a different spin on the sponsorship. So we're going to start welcoming a new SBAM member every Thursday. And this week we are welcoming Hamilton Physical Therapy. The owner is Cheryl Hamilton. She has 8 employees and she is located in Fenton. So welcome, Cheryl and team. We are pleased to welcome her on behalf of Marana Group, our sponsor for this segment. And they are a data, document, and distribution company in Kalamazoo. They themselves have been a member since 2000. So thank you to them. So Brian is here, and like I said, he's on Mackinac Island, and the Detroit Chamber's Policy Conference is just wrapping up. So Brian, can you share briefly kind of how things are going up there?
Yeah, this is actually a pretty big deal that the policy conference was held this year. So this is a gathering, a confab of civic and community, business and governmental leaders that happens each year. But it didn't happen last year. Normally it would have been at the end of May, so it was put off until September. But while the conference itself looked and felt different than it did in the past, it was a message. I mean, all these leaders that were gathering together again in person, that Michigan is open for business. And another thing, people get used to me looking for these little clues, and what do these little clues mean, and how can we use this to predict what's going to happen in the future? The governor did participate in this conference, and if there was any inkling at all about closing down businesses or re-implementing restrictions and controls on businesses and gathering sizes, she wouldn't have been here. So I think it's a good sign that those days are behind us. But still, it was a different kind of conference. It did have a registration limitation that hadn't happened before. Before, it was limited to just how many people could find rooms on the island or in Mackinac City and going back and forth. This time they had a limitation on the registration. They used the Clear app for vaccine verification before coming in, and several other types of protocols through it. So it looked and felt different than before, but it was in person, and there were people from all different levels of decision makers through the process. It's kind of nice to get back together. And as you alluded to, for the last 15 years, I have usually I play the bar circuit on Main Street. In a band. It's just one of the things I do kind of as a hobby, and but played a set last night on one of the chamber events, and so live music, I hadn't done that for a long time. Used to be able to do 2-hour sets. This morning I woke up and my vocal cords are feeling pretty strained. Only did 5 songs, but some great Michigan made music, Grand Funk Railroad and Bob Seger and Kid Rock. We had a good time. So it was nice to have people back together, and it was really awesome to see this group of leaders from all different sectors imagining again about what the future could hold.
Well, and I think it's great that you're at an event, because we're going to talk about the events industry and kind of the future of the events industry here in Michigan. Loyal viewers of the show know that we have been checking in with members in some of the hardest hit industries over the course of this pandemic, and events really did take a big hit, but things are looking up. And today we've invited Kim Corcoran. She owns Destination Michigan. So Kim, welcome to the show. So why don't you introduce yourself to our viewers and tell us a little bit about your business.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and great to hear that, Brian, you have been in an in-person event. That's music to my ears. So Destination Michigan, been around for about 14 years. Started out as a division of a larger company, and then eventually I bought out my division, Destination Michigan, where we focus on marketing events that bring together those that plan meetings and events, and those that host them. So my customers are the venues and the destinations, so the CVBs throughout the state, as well as all the different hotel and conference venues. I also have a contract. I'm an independent contractor with the MEDC, and that's called Meetings Michigan. And I'm the executive director, and we go outside of the state. We attend major trade shows and events internationally, nationally, trying to bring more meetings, conferences to the state. So bringing revenue back into our state.
So Kim, naturally, your industry is one of the hardest hit during the pandemic, and really is the one that I would say you could reasonably say today faces the most uncertainty compared to other industries in terms of what the future holds. You know, I still see events this fall that they were on and then they're off and they switched to virtual and that sort of thing. Most industries aren't dealing as much with that level of uncertainty. Maybe you could give us a state of the industry overall as you see it, both compared to pre-pandemic times, but also compared to 2020 when it was pretty much nil or all virtual. What's the state of the industry today?
Well, things are definitely better than in 2020 when we were really not allowed to have events, or for much of 2020 we were held to 10 people, which, you know, it's really hard for our venues and our convention visitors bureaus to even function when we're at those numbers of just 10. So, you know, what we've really been trying to advocate for is that we are professional meetings and events, and that we are controllable. We can control our registrants, just like at your event, Brian. You know, you had to upload your vax cards. You had to, you know, you had certain things that you needed to do. You're allowed, you have, I'm sure there's signage up that says 6 feet distancing. There's hand sanitation stations everywhere. Food and beverage, there's the clear plexiglass, you know, and servers, those types of things. So what we're trying to do is differentiate our industry from a mass gathering, which a mass gathering may not be able to be as controlled as we are. So, you know, that's kind of where we're trying to move our industry. But we right now, compared to pre-pandemic, most venues and CVBs that I have discussed this with are about between 50 and 80% of where they were at pre-pandemic. I'd say the 80% are more toward northern Michigan. They are, because they have more outdoor spaces, they have more, you know, just, I guess people feel safer in the resort areas. The 50% is closer to the downtown areas, possibly Detroit, Grand Rapids, those areas. But, you know, we are seeing that some are wanting to pull back and either cancel or postpone again this fall. June and July, we were gangbusters. Like everybody was full go when, you know, the mask mandate came off. Everybody said, let's plan our meetings in person this fall. So, I mean, we were going crazy in our industry. And then August hit and the Delta variant, and then we had some people starting to pull back again. But what we're trying to communicate to all of our organizations that plan meetings and events is keep your meeting in person. Even if numbers may be lower, that's okay. Our hotels and venues are working with you on their attrition clauses. Their, you know, that your numbers may be lower, but we want to have these meetings, even if they're at 50% to 80% of what you're used to having, we still want to have those events.
Well, that's really great. And I think that meeting planners are definitely proving that they can do these things safely. But that said, we did see a rise in remote and virtual conferences throughout the pandemic. And so how can the remote and virtual events fit together with these in-person events? And, you know, are you seeing some new best practices emerging in those areas?
I think that we all found that virtual meetings are going to continue to be a part of what we do in the meetings industry in the future. We found that we can bring together people that are, you know, remote distance away, and they're able to meet in an inexpensive, typically format. Now, if you do a full-blown conference, there are a lot of costs that are involved with doing virtual. So, you know, people have to weigh the costs and benefits of the travel and overnight versus what they can do virtually. So yeah, I think that there will be a hybrid component to a lot of meetings, especially this fall and winter. Some will still not feel comfortable traveling. So they will allow those that feel comfortable to be in person, those who don't to still be virtual. But that is, there are costs involved to that. And people for a while thought virtual is free. It is not free. And I think people are seeing that it's twice as much money and it's twice as much work. So I think in the future, a lot of organizations are going to only offer the in-person. In the short term, they'll offer both. In the longer term, they're going to offer the in-person and then possibly a recording that they can then offer to people as a, for a fee, if you want to see what we did. But they don't want to take away from that in-person networking. Our sponsors and you as businesses know that being in person is where business gets done. It's face-to-face relationships that matter. We may have been able to, you and I may be able to keep up our relationship because we already knew one another pre-pandemic. But making new relationships over Zoom, nearly impossible. So that is where, our businesses may have been able to kind of stay flatlined, but they're not growing. And so in order for our businesses to grow, we really need to meet in person. So we are really pushing that point home, that maybe you use the hybrid for like a board meeting of international attendees that couldn't get together. But for the most part, the idea sharing, the idea curation is done in person.
Yes, I mean, virtual meetings sure give us an opportunity to connect with some people that we might not get to otherwise, but we agree that the face-to-face component is really crucial. And I know here at SBAM, we have started doing our owner-to-owner events in person again. And so, it's been really great to actually get out and see people. So Kim, one last quick question. If someone here is listening and interested in kind of the guidelines or steps that they should take to ensure that their in-person meeting is safe, do you have a resource for them that would be beneficial?
Because things are changing so quickly, it's hard to, we as an industry put together a guide, and you can find that actually on the MSAE website, the Michigan Society of Association Executives. Our industry put together a plan. However, I always tell people to check the current CDC guidelines because they are changing so rapidly. Most venues and destinations are following the CDC. So that to me is the very best guideline that you can follow.
All right, that's really good advice. Kim, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
All right. So Brian, we're going to get back to Mackinac, and this policy conference is a time when new announcements are made and policy objectives are laid out. So what did you hear over the past 3 days that our members and small businesses really need to know about?
Yeah, that's the thing that I love about this particular conference. It's one of the few that I go to every year, and have for the last 15 years. There's a group of people that are involved in so many different areas, in the series of meetings and connections, conversations you can have within a few days would take months to accomplish if you're just kind of setting things up individually. And so when people use it as an opportunity to launch new things, to talk about new ideas, and it's common for new things to be laid out. So in this case, the governor had put out the economic agenda, although as I looked at it, I would describe it more as economic goals or kind of priorities laid out, not necessarily what the underlying policies will be underneath those goals. But I thought it would make sense to go through them. There's some that line up pretty well with some issues that we're working on, others where it kind of depends on what the details are underneath those objectives. So it was organized in 3 different pillars. The first pillar was to grow the middle class. So it says, and of course, you put these out. I have some experience with this. When you're in public office, you like to frame things in ways that you can't that nobody could argue with. So grow the middle class. Of course, everybody supports that. But underneath that, there are some specific goals. One of which we have been involved in for a long time. We were real happy to see on the list, was 60% of adults with post-secondary credentials by 2030. So they call it the 60 by 30 goal. 60% of people to have a post-high school credential. Could be in a skilled trade, could be a community college, could be a bachelor's degree, just some sort of certificate or credential after high school, 60% of the population. And by the way, we do have a long way to go from that, from where we stand today. The next one, lift 100,000 families out of working poverty during the next 5 years. Now, I know that what they're talking about here is they're using the United Way's ALICE rate, not the official federal poverty line, which is the ALICE rate. It gets at essentially the working poor. So people that are working, they're making income, but not quite enough to get by. So trying to get people above that rate. Again, great goal to have. The underlying policies sometimes can come at odds when you try to artificially boost wages by increasing required minimum wages and benefits and that sort of thing without corresponding increasing productivity. Economically, it's not sustainable, and so sometimes the policies underneath goals like this can be a problem. But of course, it's a great goal to have. And then to provide access to low or no child care or no cost child care for 150,000 more families. This one, in recent months, about over the last year, we've become much more involved in. Lack of available high quality child care has been a major barrier for younger workers to enter the workforce reliably. And so there are a set of goals and a very specific agenda that is included in this year's budget, and there's some policy work that's happening as well that I expect SBAM will be pretty involved in. The next one, borrowing the goodwill of small business, pillar number 2 is support small business. Of course, another one of those things, like everybody supports small business. It's one of the things in our political activities. We know that 100% of people in office say they support small business, but then we look at the record and decide who really does. Underneath this one, though, they have goals. The first is the goal to be a top 10 state for small business job growth and revenue growth from 2022 through 2026. Now, here's the thing. You notice that the goal starts in 2022, and I noticed this because we've lost more. And so we're starting at a lower point. I would rather see this goal be the #1 state from 2020 through 2026. By putting your benchmark in 2022, when we've lost more than a lot of other states, it kind of sandbags that goal. So if we can just, in this case, with this measuring stick, if we just get back to where we were before the pandemic, we'll look better than other states that didn't lose as much through the pandemic. And so, but still, good goal to have. I think that the benchmark year picked should go back to 2020, not 2022. And then a top 10 state for growth and venture capital funding over the next 5 years. Michigan has struggled for a long time on venture capital investment for early stage companies. And it's been kind of puzzling because we have a lot of research that happens, both public and private sector research. We are a top 10 state for public and private sector research in Michigan, and yet that hasn't translated into new companies here as much as other places. So another good goal, although the idea of the state doing venture, if that means the state would be doing venture capital investing, then it probably won't work. It's not a competency that the state has. So that's another one where the details will matter a lot on whether or not we can get behind it. If the idea is creating an environment where people want to invest, private sector wants to invest more here because we have the cost and the talent and the placemaking and the education and the regulations all in a competitive place, and so it attracts investment. That's the way to grow it sustainably, as opposed to the state kind of getting into venture capital investing, which can we really don't, as a governmental entity at the state of Michigan, or any state for that matter, have that as a competency. And then the final pillar was building strong communities. This one, Michigan, the statement says Michigan's residents deserve to live in vibrant communities with the kinds of services and amenities associated with a high standard of living. We have heard a lot about attracting talent into certain communities. Hard because there are things missing. Childcare, one of them that we already talked about. Also housing, and so we saw on here a goal of 75,000 new or rehabilitated housing units in the next 5 years. great goal. There's definitely a housing shortage in Michigan, high quality housing shortage at affordable levels. If you can spend a lot, you can find a place. But if you have a modest income, finding a decent place to live has become quite challenging. And not just here in Michigan, it's happening all over the country. Part of this, the inflationary pressures that we face. And another goal that we are solidly behind when it becomes this, under this third pillar, is 100% access to high-speed internet and 95% adoption by households during the next 5 years. So the idea of having reliable high-speed internet available everywhere in the state. You might remember it was kind of a joke here about even where I live, and I live out in the country, but when we started the small business briefing, I did it from my car because we did not have high-speed internet available at my house. And I would drive in my car to the gas station by the freeway and do these briefings there where I had a reliable internet service. And now it just happened to be that in late 2020 or mid 2020, the local utility ran fiber cable down my road, and so I was able to get access at that point, and it's made a huge difference. So the idea of having more access at a time when so many things are going digital is going to be more and more important for the development of communities. Those that don't have that are going to be left behind. So that's a really solid goal. So overall, I think they're good goals. The details behind the goals naturally that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where we will have some things that could potentially, if they get in between the employer and the employee and dictate the terms of employment, we're going to have to oppose those aspects of it. But on areas where it gets into building infrastructure in communications and connectivity, and also with removing barriers to employment, such as the expanding childcare eligibility, then I think there's going to be a lot that we can find common ground on. So I expect that as we move between now and the end of next year, that really probably through the springtime, you'll see some opportunity for some advancement, productivity in the legislative process with these issues. The closer that we get to the elections in 2022, when everything is up, these things are going to get harder to address. So there is a certain amount of urgency, I think, this fall and early spring next year to make some movement, to make some progress on these issues, and then probably be a pause around the summertime and through the fall when the political system kind of takes over.
That makes sense, but they are some very ambitious goals, and I'm definitely interested to see how they all play out over the next few years. So also this past week, the legislature passed a budget, and I'm hoping you can kind of shed some light as to what our members need to know about what's in that budget.
So the budget is, it's funny that the policy conference that I'm at is 3 months later than usual. And it was always the case that that they'd get the budget done right around the time the policy conference happened. But during the Snyder administration, we got the budget done 3 months early. So it was kind of surreal to have both the budget and the policy conference happening at the same time, both 3 months later than they normally happen. But I think that September is the new normal for the budget. The idea of getting it done like we did before in May or June, it doesn't look like that's going to come together anytime soon with that type of process. But there are some things that in particular that I think are pretty important to small business in there. You might recall we talked a lot earlier this year about wanting the state to make a deposit into the unemployment insurance trust fund. So employers, you all pay into the trust fund. And then if you lay off an employee or fire an employee, then they get unemployment insurance. It's paid out of the trust fund. And then so it's an employer paid fund, and it's a benefit to employees who are unemployed. So that trust fund has been depleted. It was one of the strongest in the nation before the pandemic, and it was depleted to very, very low levels. Well, we had asked for money to be deposited at least to make up for the fraudulent claims that were paid out of the fund. So that was estimated to be about $150 million in fraudulent unemployment claims that were paid out of the trust fund. Our position was, look, you cannot bill employers, small businesses, back for those claims, the fraudulent claims. The state has got to take responsibility for that. It's not the business's fault that the state paid fraudulent claims out of that fund. Now, earlier this year, there was a negotiation, and basically what the governor's office said was, look, we're not going to do that unless we get a benefits extension. We do a permanent increase in the benefits. Well, we were already competing, our employers were already having to compete with the unemployment system so much that was just not possible. But there was a lot of persistence, particularly with Representative Albert, who is the chair of the Appropriations Committee, to keep that issue alive and continue to negotiate it, keep it on the table, and chip away at it. And there will be a $150 million deposit into the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. So it's not going to change the world, but it's the principle of it that that employers will not be billed back for fraudulent claims paid out of the trust fund. So that's number one, a victory that it was a long time in coming. A great effort by Representative Albert, who's been on this briefing before, in keeping that issue alive and on the table, and finally getting it through without any kind of benefits increase or extension. The trust fund is already depleted. You can't increase payments out of it anytime soon. The other thing is there were a series of child care supports as well. So what we've seen from the Department of Labor statistics and anecdotally across all industries is that younger workers, especially those with kids, have exited the workforce at a high level. And so the lack of available high quality childcare, affordable childcare has been one of the issues. So we had worked with Republicans and Democrats in the legislature and the governor's office with a series of recommendations, many of which made it into this budget. So they will, they're going to put over 100 million more into increasing the income eligibility level. And so what that means is that people who qualify, like a family of four, the federal poverty line is $26,500. They're going to do 185% of the federal poverty line, which is almost $50,000. You qualify for this support for childcare. So it'll take a lot of people with moderate to low income that now can't afford childcare, or going to work would cost more because of childcare. And it will really open up the door for them to actually get back into the workforce and start building a career. They're also going to waive the copays for that same cohort for those parents in terms of their copay for the child care, at least for the next year, but they're not going to ask the child care providers to pay for it. So the state's going to cover that cost as well. And they have, there's so much extra federal dollars on tax revenue coming in on top of the federal dollars that the child care industry has really been hurt throughout the course of this pandemic. So we couldn't ask them to cover waiving the copays. So there's a certain amount put in for that. And also the reimbursement rate to the child care providers that are receiving subsidized payments is going to be increased. It hasn't been increased substantially in a long time. And so based on what they couldn't get help to run these places at the reimbursement rates that they were getting. So all of those things together, I think, are going to make a pretty big difference. There's other things that we'll talk about, but we're running out of time. So in the future, we'll highlight a few more things in the budget, but those are two things that we've talked about in this briefing several times that actually did make it through the process. So good news, some good progress. Those are things that Republicans and Democrats in the legislature work together on, and the governor, and thankfully, I think they're going to make some difference.
No, that is really good news, and thanks for breaking it all down. We do have one more quick item to cover, and that is international travel. So the U.S. has been closed to recreational travelers for a while, but is that going to be changing?
So in November, it will be opened back up. So international tourists can come back into the U.S. They will have to prove vaccine status, just like You have to prove that as a U.S. citizen when you go across the pond to Europe and to other places. It has been a source of contention between some of our friends that they were letting U.S. citizens travel to them, but we were not letting their citizens travel to us. And so they have worked that out now to where recreational travel will be allowed. That will ease tensions with some of our closest allies, especially in Europe and in Canada. So coming up real soon, just a little bit, just creeping back, a little bit more normalcy coming back into the into our world, and a good move. Frankly, it's overdue. It should have happened long ago, at least last summer, but better late than never.
Well, thank you. All right, everyone, that is all we have for you today. We will see you back here on Monday at 3 o'clock. Rob will be back from vacation, and so have a great rest of your week.
All right, see everybody on Monday. We'll have the numbers refreshed for you.